Sometime in early summer, on a tree branch somewhere in the northeastern United States, around 10,000 honeybees are hanging in a cluster the size of a football. They have been there for hours, maybe longer. From a distance, it looks like stillness, just a dark, humming mass pressed against the bark. But inside that cluster, a few hundred bees are running what might be the most reliable group decision-making process in the natural world. They are choosing a home, and the way they do it turns out to be nearly identical to the way your brain decides anything at all. Most people assume animals operate on instinct, that a bee colony in particular is something like a machine, individual parts executing fixed programs with no real deliberation happening. What Thomas Seeley found, over decades of careful work on a nearly treeless island off the coast of Maine, is that this assumption is almost completely wrong. A honeybee swarm does not follow its leader. It does not go with the majority. It runs something closer to a peer-reviewed debate with built-in checks that filter out bad information before a decision is ever made. The swarm, in a very specific and measurable sense, is smarter than any individual bee in it. Thomas Seeley has been studying honeybees at Cornell University since the 1970s. He is now a professor emeritus in the Department of Neurobiology and Behavior, which already tells you something interesting. A man who studies bees is housed in the department that studies brains. That is not accidental. Seeley grew up in rural New York, where his family kept bees, and by the time he reached graduate school, he had already developed what colleagues would describe as a kind of patient, almost monk-like attention to insect behavior. He did not rush, he observed. He ran experiments in conditions so carefully controlled that the results held up across decades of replication. The place he did much of this work is Appledore Island, a small, largely treeless island off the coast of Maine and New Hampshire. He chose it deliberately. Because the island has almost no natural tree cavities, the kind of enclosed hollow space a swarm of bees would normally seek out as a home, he could set out his own nest boxes and be confident that any swarm in the area would consider them. He could control the options. He could watch every step of the process. He spent years there, in some summers more or less living alongside his swarms, counting scout bees, tracking dances, mapping decisions. What he was trying to understand was a moment that every beekeeper knows and most find remarkable. In spring and early summer, when a honeybee colony grows too large for its hive, it splits. The old queen leaves with roughly half the workers, and together they cluster somewhere nearby, on a branch, a fence post, a garden wall, while they figure out where to go next. This cluster, this hanging mass of bees, is called a swarm. It is temporarily homeless, and it needs to choose a new home before it runs out of energy. The question Seeley wanted to answer was, how does it choose? The common assumption was that a swarm worked something like a simple democracy. Scout bees go out, find potential sites, report back, and the most popular option wins. Clean, efficient, majority rules. What Seeley found was that the real process is considerably more sophisticated than that. It starts when a few hundred scouts leave the swarm cluster and begin searching the surrounding area for potential nest sites. They are looking for something specific. The research showed that bees have precise preferences: a cavity around 40 liters in volume, an entrance hole of roughly 2 square inches positioned facing south and several feet off the ground, with little to no existing comb inside. A site that meets these criteria is a good home. One that misses on several counts is a bad one. The scouts do not all agree on which site is best, and they do not all find the same options. When a scout returns from a site she thinks is promising, she reports back to the cluster by doing a waggle dance. The waggle dance is a well-known behavior. Carl von Frisch won the Nobel Prize for decoding it in the 1970s, and most people know it as the way bees communicate the direction and distance of food sources. It works the same way for real estate. The scout moves through the surface of the cluster in a figure-8 pattern, wagging her abdomen on the straight run. The angle of the run relative to vertical encodes the direction of the site. The duration of the dance encodes the distance. And here is the part that matters most: the intensity of the dance. How many circuits she runs, how vigorously she performs it, corresponds to how good the sight is. A scout who found a high-quality cavity dances long and hard. A scout who found a mediocre hollow dances briefly and stops. This is already interesting because it means the quality of information in the debate is not equal. Better options get louder advocates from the start, but the system gets more complicated from here. Other scouts watching the dance will fly out and inspect the advertised site themselves. If they agree it is good, they come back and dance for it too. If they are less impressed, they dance less, or not at all. So the sites that are genuinely high quality accumulate more and more dancers over time, while the weaker options slowly fade out of the conversation. It is not a vote. It is more like a debate where the best argument gradually wins, not because anyone is in charge, but because the structure of the process filters out weak positions. But here is where Seeley's research moved into genuinely unexpected territory. Most people studying this process assumed that the swarm reaches a decision when one option has enough dancers that the others give up. What the data showed was something different. The scouts are not waiting for consensus among the dancers. They are waiting for something more local and more precise, a quorum at the actual site. Once a candidate site starts accumulating scouts, those scouts begin counting, not the dancers back at the cluster, but the other scouts present at the site itself. When the number of scouts at the site crosses a specific threshold, somewhere around 15 bees, Seeley found, something changes. The scouts at that site stop dancing to recruit more bees. Instead, they begin producing a different behavior entirely. They pipe, and then they run. The piping signal is a high-frequency vibration the scout produces by pressing her thorax to the body of another bee. The buzz run is exactly what it sounds like, a scout charging through the cluster, butting into resting bees, waking them up. These signals are the equivalent of a starter's pistol. They tell the 10,000 bees hanging in the cluster that the debate is over, it is time to move. The swarm takes off. And a small group of informed scouts, the ones who know where they're going, position themselves at the front and sides of the flying mass, guiding it toward the chosen site. The whole cluster, 10,000 bees, arrives at a home that almost none of them have ever seen, chosen by a few hundred through a process that none of them controlled individually. This was already remarkable, but when Seeley and his colleagues looked more closely at the mechanism, they found a layer underneath it that connects bee behavior to something much larger. The system has a built-in opponent process. It is not just that good sites attract more scouts. It turns out that scouts committed to one site actively work to shut down advocates for other sites. A scout who believes in Site A will approach a scout who is dancing for Site B and produce a stop signal, a short, sharp butt to the body. The stop signal causes the dancing scout to stop dancing. She may go out and re-inspect her site, come back, and dance again if she still thinks it's good. But the stop signal interrupts the process, slows the accumulation of support for weaker options, and keeps the debate from collapsing into an early, bad decision. In a 2011 paper in Science, Seeley and colleagues showed that this cross-inhibition, scouts from one camp suppressing scouts from another, is structurally identical to the way competing populations of neurons suppress each other in the human brain during a decision. When you decide to grab a cup of coffee rather than keep sitting still, groups of neurons in your cortex are essentially running the same competition. Each option accumulates activation, and the populations that represent different choices actively inhibit each other until one crosses a threshold and the decision tips. The bee swarm is running the same algorithm, not metaphorically, mathematically the same. What Seeley has argued, and what the data supports, is that a group can be reliably smarter than its smartest individual member, but only if the group is structured in a specific way. The swarm works because the scouts are independent. No single bee is in charge. There is no leader whose opinion carries more weight than anyone else's. Each scout evaluates the site herself. She dances based on what she found, not on what she was told to think. The information that circulates through the cluster is diverse, because the scouts fanned out in different directions and genuinely found different things. The quorum threshold matters too. A majority vote, in theory, can be gamed or swamped by bad information. If enough bees report on a mediocre site early on, a majority system might lock in that choice before better options are properly evaluated. The quorum system avoids this by requiring not just support, but concentrated local presence. You cannot fake a quorum by having a lot of enthusiastic dancers at a distance. The scouts have to actually be there. Seeley has, carefully and without overstatement, drawn the parallel to human group decision-making. He is not saying bees are smarter than people. He is pointing to something more specific, that the structural features which make the swarm reliable are the same features that make human committees fail. Human groups tend to suppress independent thinking. A senior voice in the room carries more weight regardless of the quality of the argument. People anchor to the first option presented. Minority views get shouted down before they can be properly evaluated. The swarm has none of these problems, not because bees are wise, but because the structure of the process prevents those failure modes from occurring. He has given talks in which he half-jokingly proposes that human organizations could adopt some of the same principles, form diverse search parties, have people evaluate options independently before comparing notes, weight the strength of advocacy in proportion to the quality of the evidence. Don't let the most vocal member of the group set the agenda. The bees, it turns out, figured this out a long time ago. They have been running this system with no central coordinator and no instruction manual for millions of years. And on a small island off the coast of Maine, a quiet man with a notebook stood among them long enough to finally understand what they were doing.